Welcome to the Rimworld mod rundown. We'll be taking a quick look at what you can expect to see from Vanilla Apparel Expanded and Vanilla Armour Expanded. For starters, you'll need the additional workshop content, Vanilla Expanded Framework, and Harmony. A double dip of mods today as they are both fulfilling the same purpose, with one leaning towards work and the other one war. This is also the first rundown that I'm making on the 1.6 patch, so fingers crossed I don't release it before there's any major changes or parts overhauls. But I couldn't see one in the works on the roadmap anywhere, so I feel pretty confident that what you see in this video should be pretty much what you get for a while to come. Before we go digging into the mods, I'm going to take a second to mention Compositable Loadouts if you're making a lot of use of additional gear in your mod list. It's intended to be updated to 1.6 and there's a rundown already on the channel that goes into more depth about how it functions. There have been a couple of new additions since I recorded that video to how it works that makes it even easier to see overlap between coverage or layers. You can copy loadout states across to other colonists in bulk, and you can even populate your crafting benches with bills automatically based on what loadouts your colonists are using.
That's good!
The new highlight system will show gear that is going to be incompatible when you're selecting something from the menu on the right.
That's good!
Unfortunately, if you're a player that uses CE, these loadouts don't yet have full compatibility with that mod. You're going to find that colonists will wear the correct armour, but are going to struggle to maintain any level of spare ammunition in their inventory.
Ooh, that's bad.
Of course, if you play with the CE ammo mechanics turned off, it's not going to be a concern for you.
That's bad.
Can I go now?
Right, into the actual mods for this video then. We're going to go over all of Apparel Expanded first, which I will avoid saying too much because it's one of those words that I learned through reading before I'd ever heard it said out loud. So I still regularly say Apparel. We'll be breaking this down tech by tech too, as I normally do. And I'm assuming for the sake of this coverage that I don't need to go into which material will or won't be best for every individual part. A passing understanding of how the various cloth, leather and metal stat offsets work should let you know that crafting something out of Devil Strand rather than light leather is going to mean that it offers better defensive properties. But I'll make sure to mention when gear is more useful for the static buff that it offers over its basic defenses. You're also going to find that when using this mod, your starting colonists now have access to a far greater variety of starting gear, leading to more unique appearances in your colony right off the bat. One other small thing of note is that some of the content that was included in these mods at time of release, a whopping 6 years ago, is no longer present, so the workshop pages for both mods aren't entirely accurate. We'll start with the 3 parts included that have 0 tech requirement and will be available to make on every single colony, even from a humble crafting spot. Tribal kilts are an alternative to your standard tribal wear, saving 1/3 of the material cost at the expense of offering less insulation and 0 coverage for the twins. So depending on your ideology settings around nudity, the guys in your colony may be a lot happier about your choice of crafting these compared to the women that you're equipping them on.
Oh, what a lovely looking pair!
You took the words right out of my mouth.
The poncho, on the other hand, is useful for pretty much everybody if you've started tribal. As it sits on the outer layer, this can be worn with standard tribal wear to provide a solid chunk of additional insulation and some minor protection. It's most useful when the biome that you've started in has a somewhat challenging summer or winter temperature. It saves you the time that's needed to keep running your colonists into a room with a safe temperature or spending a small fortune of wood to fuel passive coolers and campfires constantly. For something that actually offers protection at this level too, you have the pelt coat. Not only does this hold up for tribals, it's on par with a duster in terms of its coverage and armour. The only bit of difference is that the insulation values have been jiggled around a bit, so it's better against the cold rather than the heat. The main downside with a pelt coat is that it can only be made from leather, so you're going to need to be hunting big game to make these out of a decent material. Whereas the duster is always going to be more accessible because you have options like cloth and Devil Strand. Onto complex clothing now, which sees a few new parts filter into it. First up is the apron, worn on the middle layer, which makes it surprisingly flexible to include with most early game loadouts. This isn't going to be keeping your colonists as safe as equipping something like a flak vest, but it's providing 10% global work speed and 10% general labour speed. Not only that, it's covering your colonist's legs too, allowing you to stack 3 layers of protection over standard pants by combining this with something like a duster or a pelt coat. so it can keep people somewhat protected against basic weapons, provided that you're seriously layering them up.
Wow, lucky I always keep a Bible close to my heart. Huh?
Then you have the blouse, which offers far less overall armour than any other shirt choice you could craft, with its main offset being to heat insulation. So if you landed in the extreme desert, you may want to consider these to help with workers that spend a lot of time outdoors. The tunic, on the other hand, is a slightly more insulated t-shirt. It costs the same amount of materials and provides the same coverage, which for most will be a turn-off because that means forearms are left totally exposed to damage. And on the topic of things being covered, boots. That's right, you can finally cover hands and feet if you have these mods installed. Boots are cheap enough to make at just 30 leather, but what you really want them for is the plus 0.1 move speed that they offer. Every little helps. You don't necessarily want to go crazy spending expensive leather making these, as you're only ever going to have one layer covering a colonist's feet, with the difference between 10 and 40% sharp coverage from light leather to thrumbo fur really struggling to justify that investment. If someone shoots you in the foot, chances are that shot is packing enough penetration to totally bypass that defense regardless. As well as boots, you also have shoes, for a more formal option. Boots offer slightly more armour as well as better insulation overall, but with shoes you're swapping that move speed bonus to a 10% increase to social impact. I never really value social impact that highly as a stat, due to its somewhat niche use. It'll be improving the colonist's opinion bonuses and negatives that come about from conversations or interactions, as well as boosting the quality of the throne speeches, leader speeches, or conversion rituals, and that's it. It's not going to impact trade prices, prisoner recruitment, or the standard conversion, or the outcome of things like peace talks, so the move speed bonus from boots is just all around more useful. And finally at this tech you've got gloves. These aren't going to offer much in the way of armour, but they are fantastic for a cold climate. As well as applying solid insulation, they always have a flat increase to minimum comfortable temperature of -2 degrees. So even with a crappy material like cloth or plain leather, they're still doing solid work on helping to avoid hypothermia. And who knows, that tiny amount of armour might just be enough to stop someone losing a finger in a social fight. That takes us into a new tech, casual wear. This requires complex clothing to research, and first up is the casual t-shirt. This is identical stat-wise to a normal t-shirt in every way, but it comes with the Rimworld logo printed on it. Neat. The tank top is an ideal choice if you're an extremely red-skinned man in the UK that drinks Stella and has a clumsy missus. You're never making this for protection, as it only covers the torso and offers potentially the least armour of any skin layer choice. However, wearing this does grant a 0.1 melee dodge and a 0.05 move speed bonus, so it can have a place if you're looking to go all out speed on your colonist to kite enemies around the map. The hoodie goes the other way, in that it's providing the same coverage that you would get from the best base game shirt, the button down, and even providing a little bit more insulation. You're paying a lot of extra materials though for a tad more cold tolerance, especially when you could craft a button down shirt and a pair of gloves for the same amount of materials a single hoodie takes, with the gloves alone providing much better cold insulation. Next is shorts. I like shorts, they're comfy and easy to wear. Whilst these are offering the same coverage as pants, they have considerably lower armour values, which is offset by the 0.12 move speed bonus that they're providing. So if you're stacking all of the items we've covered so far that boost move speed, you're currently up to 0.27. Not bad to have a slightly better fast walker trait on every colonist simply from your gear choices. And you can push that move speed even further by wearing a baseball cap? Not quite sure how headwear is improving move speed. Maybe it's making it so that people are more aerodynamic, or it's helping by keeping the sun out of their eyes when they're running. Obviously headgear is tricky because being shot in the face is pretty much always bad news in Rimworld, so helmets are more often essential. If you think you can risk it with a low armor value, the baseball cap is granting another 0.05 move speed.
I'm fast as fuck, boy.
Then we've got gear worn on one of the often forgotten layers, the eyes. In base game, the only other part worn on this layer is the blindfold, so you're unlikely to struggle to decide what you would rather equip in this slot. Glasses come with a unique offset of slightly dampening psychic sensitivity, so presumably Darren Brown has a harder time hypnotising people that don't have 20/20 vision. If you'd rather be the cooler Daniel, you can always put on sunglasses instead. They are more expensive to make as they take plasteel rather than normal steel, but they grant much more useful bonuses, with a 5% to negotiation and social impact. I do value negotiation as a stat compared to social impact, thanks to it speeding up prisoner conversions and recruitment, which are used far more frequently. Lastly, with casual wear, you have the scarf. Whilst you might think that stacking the best material possible on this is going to help with neck armour, it actually occupies the jaw slot, so it's not really that protective. The main offset, of course, is the cold insulation it provides, with a decent quality woolen scarf offering an extra 15 to 20 degrees. These become basically essential if you want to wear actual armour in a cold biome, rather than having to put parkas on everyone. Then we've got formal wear, which needs casual wear to have been researched as a prerequisite. As you would expect, all of the gear in this project aims to increase various social stats on the wearer. The shirt and tie is just objectively better than your standard button-down shirt. You're saving 5 materials, and you're getting a 15% bonus to trade price improvement and 10% more social impact. Of course, you have to research a few extra projects to get to this point to be able to make them, but there is no downside to changing over to these for your new standard skin layer. It makes me wonder if this should actually be 50 materials rather than 40, and it's just a typo in the values.
Who cares about any of this? They're just clothes. Just clothes. Suits are cool. Exhibit A.
The trousers follow the logic that the shirt and tie skipped, as they cost 5 more materials than standard pants, with identical armour and insulation, and a 10% bonus to social impact. So with these you are actually paying a little bit more for that bonus, which does make sense. Given how many items you can make that have a bonus to social impact, if you're doing a royal playthrough or actually make use of leader speeches, it's worth creating a single set of gear that stacks all of this together and spends most of its time in storage. It can make a big difference to throw it all on when you only get one chance to perform a ritual per quadrum. The suit jacket is fighting really hard for the layer that it occupies, as it's outer. It costs the same amount of materials to make as the Old Faithful Duster, but it lacks any of the limb coverage. It has a lower base armor value to work with, and it's got far less insulation. But if you're using this purely for the stat offset, it nets you an extra 15% trade price improvement and 10% more social impact. Again, it's useful to keep on a dedicated shelf. It's something you can quickly force equip before dealing with a trader. The skirt costs less material to make than the trousers and offers lower armour and insulation, but you'll be getting 12% social impact compared to the trousers' 10%, presumably because you can do the whole basic instinct thing. Given that you're only really going to be crafting these parts for the stat offsets, if you want the highest possible values on your best socialite that happens to be a guy, they're going to be insisting that you call it a kilt instead. Finally at this tech you have the fedora, guaranteed to prevent the colonists wearing it from ever successfully flirting. Just like with a baseball cap, headgear made out of fabric rather than metal isn't really something many players will use due to the increased risk of a one-shot kill, but if you want to stack all of the social impact buffs up until this point, you can get 10% from shoes, 5% from sunglasses, 10% from a shirt and tie, 12% from a skirt, 10% more from a suit jacket, and a final 10% from the fedora, making a whopping 57% increase. You can't really argue with that if you're regularly doing royal speeches.
Don't worry, I understand about trains. Now tell me, Dave, can this go sideways?
Work attire is the next project to cover, with this branching off of complex clothing. You're going to find that almost all of these parts are heavily focused on improving one area of work for the colonists wearing it. Starting with the builder's jacket, this actually offers a solid amount of sharp and blunt armour given that it's only costing cloth and silver to make. Presumably the blunt armour value is so high to try and offset damage caused by ceiling collapses, if you're deconstructing things a little bit too hastily. As well as those armour values, you're also getting 10% more construction speed, construction success chance, and repair success chance. Now for most of your colonists, if they have a skill of about 8 or so, the success chance really doesn't matter a great deal, but that 10% additional speed can be pretty nice on large projects like thrones, royal beds, or if you're using other modded content, pyramids and the like. That builder's jacket can also be paired with the hard hat to complete the look, with this offering an absolutely insane amount of blunt armour to the head and ears for just 45 steel. Of course, the sharp armour is still kinda garbo, so bullets aren't going to be stopped by this in any meaningful way. You're getting slightly less offsets with the helmet, but fortunately the best one, construction speed, is still here with a 10% increase, as well as 5% to construction success chance. Stuff like this is by no means essential, but it's not terrible when worn outside of its intended use either. So keeping your best builder wearing these the majority of the time isn't as dangerous as keeping your best royal wearing fancy clothing rather than prestige armour, as the construction gear can still take a hit or two, especially in melee against fists or blunt weapons.
Get on your head.
Then you have the chef's uniform, and the offsets you're getting with this that matter are 0.2 cooking speed, 10% butchery speed, 5% butchery efficiency, and 0.1 cleanliness. Now I get for some of you out there, it's going to be weird to see certain values work in things like 0.2 for cooking speed, whereas something else is a flat percentage, like butchery speed. Just know that 0.2 would normally translate to around 20%, but the game does like to round up every now and again, so if you check on the info page you see it's actually 15%. Of course, as always, with stat offsets around things like this, you might have capped these stats by simply having a high cooking skill. So if you want these bonuses to always apply, consider using a mod like Unlimited Reborn to uncap your stats. The Chef's Toque is also helping out with cooking, but offsetting slightly different stats. For only 30 fabric, you'll be getting 10% less food poisoning chance, 0.1 cooking speed, and 5% additional butchery efficiency. Now, the efficiency bonus to butchery is pretty tidy if you're making use of it when you're carving up an animal like a thrumbo, as whilst the bits of extra meat are probably overkill, it's also going to improve the amount of leather that you end up with, which is a much greater prize. The fleece shirt is your general outdoor wear. Costing the same as a button down, it offers slightly less armour, but it has a 5% improvement to plant harvest yield, plant work speed, animal gather yield, and animal gather speed. So if you've got a dedicated farmer that takes care of both your livestock and fields, this will squeeze out just a little bit extra when it comes harvesting time. Then you've got jeans. These are the only things in this tech that have no stat bonus. However, they offer better values across the board when compared to normal pants, for the cost of 15 extra materials per craft. They're one of the better options to wear underneath your armour from this mod. They're just not really that fancy is all.
How do these jeans look?
Back to items with stats, now we've got overalls. These are another outdoorsy work item, but they're also pretty versatile as they occupy the middle layer rather than the outer, and offer coverage to your legs as well. On top of the same 5% increases that the fleece shirt granted, the overalls also increase carrying capacity by 15. This capacity is specifically how much a colonist can carry whilst on your tile, not in a caravan. So it's going to help out with things like hauling larger stacks of materials. It cuts down on the amount of trips that you need to make around the base. Finally in this tech, there is the jumpsuit, which I'm pretty partial to. This uses 80 fabric or leather of your choice, and it covers basically everything on the skin layer and a single bit of gear, with an additional 5% bonus to global work speed. So whilst you might be able to get more stat offsets by equipping separate pieces of clothing, a crafting inspiration used on one jumpsuit made out of high quality material goes a really long way in providing a solid foundation of protection across the majority of a colonist's body. The next project that comes off of complex clothing is Sterile Attire. All 3 items in this project use fixed ingredients, so the stats you get are purely going to be determined by quality. Scrubs are here, offering absolutely 0 armour and minimal insulation for a bonus to all things medical. Surgery success, 15%. Operation speed and 10 quality, 10%. 10 speed, 5%. If you've ever had a colonist with ridiculously good traits and high skills like medical, social, and intellectual, but find them incapable of violence, scrubs can be pretty legit. If nothing else, they look the part.
Come in for brain surgery and receive a free Chinese finger trap.
The surgical mask does actually add a tiny amount of armour, but again, you're making it for the offsets. A further 10% to surgery success and 10% to medical 10 quality. If you've got a stacked out hospital, chances are you're already going to be hitting the hard cap on success chance for surgery at 98%, and reaching the best possible tend your medicine of choice can achieve. But these bits of gear have a good place if you're still tending to people in bedrooms, and don't yet have sterile materials and medical beds researched. Finally here, there's the lab coat, not to be confused with the anomaly lab coat that helps with void study. This lab coat is improving drug synthesis and cooking speeds, as well as research speed by 10%. Given that 1.6 is changing the work speed on certain production buildings if they aren't placed in the correct room, this can be pretty handy if you've got a dedicated intellectual, as it's going to cover all of the work types that they can do in their lab. On to the final project with apparel, military clothing. You need to have researched both work and sterile attire before you can get this, so whilst they're not necessarily expensive projects, it's still a fair amount of research to get here. The sheriff shirt is the first piece. It's the same as a button-down shirt stat-wise, but it costs 5 more fabric and 20 additional gold, which gets you the bonus of 15% more negotiation ability. If you're rocking with a cowboy colony, this is definitely an aesthetic choice for your leader or moral guide. Then you've got the military uniform. This works like the jumpsuit does, in that it's covering all of the body parts in a single piece of gear, for a lower amount of fabric or leather whilst costing 20 additional steel. This does have a much greater potential in terms of the armour value that it can provide, thanks to better base stats to build from, but you're going to be losing that 5% global work speed bonus and swapping it for 20% hunting stealth and 10% pain shock threshold. Hunting stealth is always a bit of an odd stat, as I find that if an animal has a revenge chance, it's normally easier just to nuke it with multiple colonists, rather than having a single one chase it around hoping they don't anger it. The military jacket has a solid buff, with it reducing mental break threshold by 10%, but it can be a tricky one to make use of, as it's occupying the outer slot that would normally be reserved for gear with a high armour value. It's rare that you're going to have a colonist walking about in their day-to-day life constantly verging on snapping, at least when you have all your amenities and such in place, which means most negative mood offsets normally come in during raids, things like being in pain, having seen too many corpses, or having lost a friend. So this break offset is needed during that time, which is when you want to have your armour on. It might still help in the days after whilst the negative offsets are wearing off though. Then, to wrap up Apparel Expanded, you have the Military Beret. Costing just 20 fabric or leather, as you'd expect this is going to be offering very little armour, but it's granting a small bonus to shooting accuracy. It's baby's first gun link, and people don't really use gun links because having a head uncovered is just asking to lose that colonist. Given that the gun link gives +3 accuracy and the beret is 0.1, I can't imagine many people out there are going to be risking their brain box to put this on.
I mean, my heart's beating, my hands are shaking, but I'm still shooting, and I'm still getting the headshots. It's like boom, headshot, boom, headshot, boom, headshot.
Halfway there, we're into Armour Expanded. How the hell did I make a video covering gear end up being this long? Starting with stuff that needs no tech whatsoever, we've got wooden armour and a stone war mask that can only be made at the crafting spot. Honestly, the wooden armour is a pretty solid option for a tribal start, as ridiculous as that sounds. For just 80 wood, you're getting a decent amount of sharp and even a fair chunk of blunt armour to the neck and torso, which can help out against early manhunters and other tribal raids, making it less likely they'll land those dangerous organ blows or give you a large cut to the neck which will put a colonist down in a matter of hours. Of course, if you're not playing tribal, you'll find that this gives other tribal raids at least a tiny amount of survivability, with the occasional shot glancing off of them now. Of course, for the extra weight they're wearing, they are losing 0.2 move speed. The stone war mask has the same defensive stats regardless of the material that you build it out of, so pick whichever blocks you feel give it the coolest colour. The armour on these masks at a normal quality is equal to a masterwork wooden war mask, so honestly again it's not awful if you've established a tribal colony and are waiting on research to progress further, especially as these masks cover every part of the head, so it lowers the likelihood of a scarring blow landing on the eyes, or things like the nose and jaw being destroyed by one good hit. They still grant the same 10% pain shock threshold of a wooden war mask as well, only they have a 0.1 move speed penalty.
See ya.
Now we have 2 parts from the leather tanning research, which you'll need to have completed complex clothing to unlock. The gambeson is a protection forward option for the skin layer on your colonist torso. It'll be providing considerably much more sharp armour than other clothing you can craft, whilst needing a good chunk of additional materials, with the downside being that if you compare it to something like a button-down shirt, the gambeson isn't granting any coverage to the neck. So the armour that it offers is better, but it's going to leave a very vulnerable spot totally exposed. You need to weigh up what you value more. The quilted vest is kind of an annoying niche, purely because of its incredibly low coverage. Even with the nerf to the flak vest in 1.6, that's still covering the torso and neck. Even the wooden armour covers the torso and neck. This only covers the torso for 55 leather or fabric. However, it does have a really good armour scaling for the material that you pick, hitting 50% sharp armour from Devil Strand at normal quality with no move speed penalty in sight and a nice bit of insulation to boot. It's just very difficult to justify making these en masse when 80 wood nets you the same sharp protection as 55 Devil Strand, and protects a wider area. Next is a single bit of tech that you get in military clothing. If you're not using Apparel Expanded alongside Armour Expanded, the prerequisite is going to be complex clothing, rather than the work and sterile attire. The balaclava is a layered pastry dessert filled with chopped nuts and drizzled in honey or syrup. Whilst wearing a dessert on your head isn't really conventional, it does help by providing 5% more mental break threshold, thanks to having your head surrounded by deliciousness. Whilst this is good in terms of its coverage, with it protecting the entire head, even the best fabric and leather is always going to be beaten by a simple steel helm in terms of the protection that it can offer. Wearing one of these, however, is mandatory if you deliver fast food in the UK on a push bike, regardless of the weather outside. Preferably, you're pairing this with a hoodie, puffer jacket, jeans and gloves.
2 + 2 is 4, -1, that's 3, quick maths.
Military camouflage is unlocked after clothing, with this getting you the ghillie suit and hood. The suit does have a unique interaction if it's worn by someone that you don't control, so it's best to take note when enemies are wearing it. The ghillie suit is the part that provides the unique effect, with it making the pawn wearing it unable to be selected and removing visibility of their nameplate. You can still target people with a ghillie suit, just like any other enemy, but it does mean you need to pay a little bit more attention to raiders when they come in wearing this. If you want to get a quick count by selecting them all, it's going to skip over ghillie suit wearers, and those wearing these suits may slip by unnoticed if you're focusing only on red names. The gear itself is fixed in the materials that it uses, so the stats will always be low defensively even at a high quality. You're making this for the huge hunting stealth and shooting accuracy bonus that it comes in with, which comes at the cost of a slightly higher aiming time. The hood doesn't provide the unique bonus of hiding the pawn that's wearing it, but it rounds out the stat bonuses from the suit, to provide 100% hunting stealth when both parts are worn. Unfortunately, even with 20 shooting, 20 animals, and wearing both of these bits of gear, the post-processing curve still brings that down to 90%, so you're not immune from retaliation. Again, this is another use case for Unlimited Reborn, as it can actually make hunting stealth more reliable as a stat when the cap can be reached.
You're all stupid. See, they're gonna be looking for army guys.
Also building on from military clothing, you have hazard protection, which gets you the hazmat suit and hood. This gear is pretty cumbersome, with a significant equip delay. It also never offers much in the way of armour, regardless of what fabric you use to make it. It does, however, have really nice insulation from both heat and cold. The main reason this exists, of course, is the offsets that it offers, with the suit lowering psychic sensitivity by 75%, granting 75% general toxic resistance and 100% toxic environment resistance, at the cost of lowering move speed by 0.5. If you put the hood on as well, you're losing 10% global work speed, but gaining a further 25% reduction in psychic sensitivity, 25% more general toxic resist, and 20% additional environmental resistance. Whilst this does protect you from new effects being applied, like toxic buildup from standing in a grenade or toxic fallout, and rot stink if you're wading through a sea of goopy corpses during cremation time. Putting this suit on after having gained a significant amount of buildup won't magically remove it, so you need to be proactive in using this gear, not reactive. Let's get to covering some actual armours then. All the way back in base game plate armour tech, you get quite a lot here too. Chainmail is a skin layer option to add even more armour on your colonist. Great for your frontliners that have to hold down the doorway and will inevitably take a knock or two. Whilst this does let you get a very high armour value for just a little bit of steel, with solid coverage too as it even takes care of the wearer's legs and fully protects the arms, it's not providing any insulation, and it's going to hinder move speed just a little bit. Provided your base is well regulated in its temperature, it's not such an issue, but someone wearing only armour on every layer is going to succumb to hypothermia or heatstroke far more easily than a colonist using a mix of clothing and armour in their layers.
Take your best shot! I'm wearing 17 layers! I brought this on myself.
The chest plate is that familiar combo of middle layer, covering, torso and neck, for a solid amount of armour. Obviously it's not quite as protective as wearing a flak vest, but this is offering more than your wooden armour would for the same move speed penalty. The only real downside is it's 90 metal, making it quite expensive for just a middle layer, as you could have made a full suit of plate for 170, which also covers your shoulders, arms and legs for much greater values. Of course, you could be using this because you prefer mobility over flat armour, or you might happen to have a solid outer layer option to pair with this instead. Light plate armour is the option to use if you find that a 0.8 move speed penalty from full plate is too restrictive, with this only slowing the wearer down by 0.2. As it's much lighter, it's also providing less protection, both in terms of flat armour value and coverage. It's pretty much half plate. When compared to the chest plate though, you're getting a lot more coverage, with the same armour value for just 40 additional metal, and they both pack that same move speed penalty. If you did still decide that the chest plate was the way to go, but you also wanted some protection on your shoulders, you can make a set of dedicated shoulder pads to be worn on the outer layer. These offer great armour values for very little penalty to move speed, but the big drawback is that they're covering the shoulders on the outer layer. There are very few bits of gear that you can wear on the outer layer that don't cover the shoulders as well as the torso. Not only that, wearing shoulder pads this way means that you never get to cover your arms on the outer layer because there are no standalone bracers. It definitely plays like an aesthetic choice when leaning into these, instead of trying to make the most efficient suit of armour you can with the best coverage and protection combined. Then to round out your part coverage in this tech you have the plate helmet, which offers better coverage than the simple helmets at the cost of being slightly less protective. They'll also hamper your shooting accuracy, so these are better suited for a melee fighter to keep their eyes, nose and jaw safe from things like manhunters, which seem to have a lovely habit of going for vulnerable spots, scarring them and totally gimping your colonist stats. The plate boots are your basic armour choice for footwear, with this slowing move speed by 0.1 and offering more protection than you would get from wearing boots, but not so much more that your toes will be completely safe in a fight. Whilst I value armour on the head above pretty much all else, a 20% difference in armour gained by wearing plate boots over leather boots that come from Apparel Expanded isn't quite worth it to me. Losing a toe or two isn't the end of the world, and the move speed bonus will offset the penalty from that anyway, and by the time you get your hands on some bionics, the odd missing piggy can be pretty quickly fixed. It's the same story with the plate gloves. They're offering much better armour than a pair of cloth or woolen gloves, but they come with a 5% global work speed penalty. Whilst colonists having broken or mangled fingers isn't exactly ideal, and some enemies do fight dirty and seem to zero in on destroying your digits, 36% sharp and 18% blunt armour that these offer at a normal quality, it's not really going to do a great deal when a Neanderthal swings a mace with 21% penetration into your pinky and turns it into something that resembles an empty sausage casing. Onto Flak armour research now, with this bringing in a new absolutely awesome set of gear, Riot, helping you stay in melee fights with its ridiculously high blunt armour. These riot parts all use fixed materials, so the only way to change the values that the gear can offer is via quality. At normal, you get just 45% sharp armour, but 106% blunt, across your torso, neck, shoulders, arms and legs. The move speed penalty isn't even that bad, it's just minus 0.12. This suit heavily incentivizes you to charge into melee with the big scary enemies that would normally be blasting you to pieces with their ranged weaponry. Think things like centipedes, lancers, pikemen, or even empire soldiers. If you can wrap them up in combat and force them to throw weapon butt or limb attacks your way, this suit is easily going to deflect them. The helmet also provides 106% blunt armour with full coverage, so outside of a colonist's hands and feet, there is very little vulnerability whilst wearing this gear. Wearing this stuff also makes for a fantastic prison warden. If anyone has aspirations of breaking out or decides to go berserk and start hitting anyone that enters their cell, strap on some riot gear and walk in with a big heavy subduing stick. It'll make short work of them with basically no risk to your own colonist. Finally, there's the riot shield. This is phenomenal even if you don't pair it with the full suit of riot gear. But by stacking both of them, it makes for bonkers numbers of blunt defense and even a reasonable amount of sharp armor. The shield itself protects the neck, torso, arms, hands and legs, so with this, only your feet are left as a weak point. You're going to be losing a significant amount of melee dodge, melee hit and shooting accuracy for carrying the shield, but 3 colonists with these holding a doorway can basically shrug off anything. Pair this with a decent suit of sharp armour for a nice even 120 to 150% from all damage types, with coverage across basically the entire body. On to a new project from Armour Expanded, Trooper Armour, which requires fabrication and flak armour to have been researched. This gear comes in with both standard and prestige versions, with the main upside being its flexible protection and increased speed.
Sorry, nothing personal, kid.
Sorry, it's nothing personal.
The stats on the armour and helmet between regular and prestige versions are the same, so I won't cover them separately. You're not going to be getting screwed out of any sharp or blunt armour by inlaying the piece with gold, and for that little bit of extra investment you benefit from increased psychic sensitivity and faster neural heat recovery, as well as being able to satisfy a noble's demand for clothing if they're quite far along with the Imperial hierarchy. Trooper armour is less protective than base game recon, with it falling far behind something like marine gear, but no armour of this tier can compete with that 0.5 bonus to move speed that the suit grants. Not only that, the trooper gear only occupies the middle layer, while still granting coverage across everything barring hands and feet. That means you're still able to accentuate this with many pieces of outer gear, even putting on something like a military jacket from Clothing Expanded to benefit from that 10% mental break threshold, with the trooper armour itself offering an additional 5% more mental break threshold to play with too. The helmet only covers the top of the head, so eyes, nose and jaw are still vulnerable, as well as the armour values that it gives to the covered parts being worse than recon gear, which would at least be covering the whole head. Given that the only upside that you get from using the trooper helmets is a 5% bonus to mental break threshold, it's not unreasonable to pair the trooper armour suit with a marine helmet to get the best of both worlds, while still being able to wear a bit of drip on your outer layer for some extra armour or just some stat offsets. Of course, we're missing protection for the hands and feet with this setup, so you want marine armour research to get the best boots and gloves possible. The marine boots not only have the best armour value that you're going to get on your feet, they also have a 0.05 move speed bonus. As well as having all of these upsides, they aren't excessively expensive either. They cost just 20 plasteel and 1 advanced component per pair. Given that a bionic leg needs 4 advanced components, spending just one of them to more reliably protect a colonist's toes from being destroyed is pretty reasonable. The marine gloves are similar in their approach. The best armour values you're going to get on your hands, as well as a 0.5 bonus to shooting accuracy, costing the same as the boots. I typically value move speed above everything else on my colonists, so I'm normally grabbing the boots on everyone first, but the gloves are definitely not something you want to skip. Unfortunately, the game is still going to be using your bare fist when calculating unarmed damage values, so having a pair of these equipped isn't going to let you absolutely slap the shit out of a raider that tried to tie you up in melee. On the flip side of that, if someone wearing marine gloves gets into a social fight over cheating at the poker table, it isn't going to result in a colonist being turned into strawberry jam either. And finally, the last new project, Siegebreaker Armour, which requires you to have researched both marine armour and shields. This, just like the trooper gear, comes in both normal and prestige versions, which is exactly the same story as the trooper gear 2. You pay a little bit more in gold and plasteel for the prestige variant, but it comes with a bonus to psychic sensitivity and neural heat recovery. We'll stick to going over the normal armours rather than doing both. So what does the Siegebreaker Armour fall into in terms of its power then? It has more armour than the marine gear, however it costs about the same to make as Cataphract, with it offering less armour than that level of tech, and it has a considerably more punishing move speed penalty of -1.1, which is even more damaging since the 1.6 patch that softened the move speed offset on both marine and Cataphract gear. So this Siegebreaker Armour is both expensive and slow, whilst being a solid suit of armour but not quite the best you could get. Of course, it's not the whole story. The main upside to wearing this armour is that it has a built-in shield. Now, this shield recharges extremely slowly, and it has a greatly reduced capacity in comparison to wearing a normal belt, as it's just 2% per second compared to a standard 13, with a max of 40% shields against a belt's 110%. But the Siegebreaker shield is ranged friendly, meaning you are able to shoot out of the localized shield and aren't restricted to only fighting with melee combat whilst wearing this. Just be aware that if you are trying to grab some distance from opponents, you will likely end up in melee combat though, thanks to its painfully slow movement speed. The helmet on the other hand is just a plain and simple good helmet. Only a few percent off Cataphract's armour values, with it costing 5 less plasteel but 1 additional standard component. It also grants 5% additional pain shock threshold, just like the Siegebreaker suit does. And at the point of wearing gear like this, you're likely to find that colonists only really go down one of two ways. Either they get a massive accumulation of bruises from sharp attacks being reduced to blunt hits, causing a colonist to drop when the pain becomes unbearable, or they get hit by one shot that manages to bypass all armour and hit something important, like the heart, liver or brain, and immediately turns them into a sack of potatoes. So when wearing gear this tanky, a little bit of extra pain shock threshold does help. Just be aware that trying to get into melee with a suit of this stuff on is going to be a royal pain in the ass.
Well, I'd say come up here and get me, but it's hard to walk upstairs when you're wearing a 12-piece cast iron skillet set.
And there we have it, all of Apparel and Armour expanded in a single video. Time to see if any of this stuff gets rebalanced or tweaked with the release of Odyssey. Even if there are parts of this mod that you're unlikely to put to use yourself in any given colony, I find that having them enabled makes for dramatically more interesting raids and caravans in terms of variety, both visually and statistically. And, as with everything in Rimworld, if there are parts of this mod that you find annoying, or if you only want a handful of additions that the mod has to offer, like hand and footwear for example, remember that Cherry Picker exists. Oscar always says that VE mods aren't intended to all be used at the same time, so don't feel like you need to use every part of each individual mod either, if you're finding that it's making your research tree or your crafting bench a little bit unmanageable. If you'd like to see the current suggestion list for mod rundowns, it's available to view on my Patreon page. Just be aware that it's going to need to be updated to version 1.6 soon. All of the posts there are totally free to read and it's pinned at the very top of the page. You can support me in producing content like this for just £1 a month. It gets your name in the credits of these videos and it helps me to stay alive. Thanks for watching folks. If you have any mods you would like to see a full breakdown for or suggestions of mods you would like to see covered, feel free to leave them in the comments, I might get around to them. I'll be back again soon with another Rimworld mod rundown. Wherever you are in the world, enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon or evening. Take care.